Ah oui, il faut que ça corresponde à ce qu'il y a.
Welcome to our panel on journalism plus imagination. When I think of ideas and imagination and creativity, I often think about Joseph Niepce, an engineer who 199 years ago, in 1826, was sitting in his country house in a nondescript village in Burgundy, trying to invent something new. He was toying with images, and at the time they were ephemeral, they were fleeting. They could be produced with a device called a camera oscura, Latin for dark room. There is no inventor of the camera oscura since it has existed since the dawn of time. It's a natural phenomenon that can be compared to a rainbow. The conditions must be right: light outside, darkness inside, and a small hole. Our head is a camera oscura. So Joseph was experimented. He wanted to capture those ephemeral, elusive, rainbow-like images just made of light on something physical so they could last forever and be reproduced and shared. For centuries, people had been trying and failing at doing it, but Joseph did it. For a whole day, he exposed a tin plate covered with tar to the light, and it worked. He called it photography. What you see here are the rooftops of his Burgundy village. It is the first photograph ever of our world. Ten years later, in 1838, the exposure time, the click, so to speak, was reduced to 10 minutes. Louis Daguerre, a guy fascinated by innovation, who liked to tinker, took a photography through the window of his Parisian studio, Place de la République. A stranger happened to be having a shoe shine during those exact 10 minutes. He didn't move. What you see is the first photograph of a human being ever. I'm telling you this story because, of course, it's a great story, and we love great stories. It's a great story about a fantastic machine that changed our world forever, but also because imagination and ideas need to be captured so we can work with them. For the next 45 minutes, you will hear about beauty, wonder, humor, surprise, subjectivity, irony, fantasy, even fiction, things that you don't necessarily associate with reported media. It's my joy and honor to share the stage with Sonia, with David, and with Douglas, who came all the way from San Francisco.
Maybe you're a writer or a filmmaker or a data journalist. I want you to imagine for a minute that tomorrow you can't do it anymore. What would you do? What would you make? I'm asking because this happened to me, and it happened to my colleagues, and it was terrifying, but it was also inspiring. I was a magazine feature writer and audio producer who became an entrepreneur. I started a company that made a print and online magazine, the California Sunday Magazine. We covered California, the American West, Asia, and Latin America. We were known for big, deep reported features, ambitious photography, adventurous design. We actually won a Pulitzer Prize for reporter Nadia Drost's coverage of migration through the Darien Gap. We also created a series of live multimedia journalism performances, a live magazine. It was called Pop-Up Magazine. Writers, photographers, audio producers, filmmakers, comedians presented new, mostly reported stories in all different kinds of media mashed together, live scored by a band on stage. We performed shows live for tens of thousands of people a year at big theaters across North America. We covered politics and war and technology and food and relationships and pop culture and more. And we learned that the stage is a really great place to experiment. This is author and artist Leanne Shapton live painting a story about a forgotten early pioneer of photography. He made ghostly silhouettes with light, but couldn't get them to last. So you may know where this is going. March of 2020, every theater closed. Live shows disappeared. For how long? For a week? For a month? Forever? We had to imagine our way forward. Basically, we had to figure out what other kinds of editorial experiences can you make. So we made a box of stories, a tiny graphic memoir, designed objects, recipe cards inspired by art and fiction, stories you could taste and smell, literally. We made an audio miniseries and a companion zine to accompany walks outside. And we made our sidewalk issue, which I loved. It was a series of stories in all different kinds of media, film, print. We made a tabloid newspaper about love. We hid audio stories. We had an art vending machine. We put them across 3 neighborhoods, one in New York, one in San Francisco, one in Los Angeles. And then the table of contents was a beautiful map that you had to use to explore a place you were visiting or a place you knew really well and see it in a new way. We ended up surviving for years instead of months. When we finally wound the company down in 2023, I wasn't sure what I would do next. But eventually I figured it out. I wanted to try and keep imagining like this. Now, around that time, maybe just a couple weeks later, I went to watch the San Francisco Symphony rehearse because I love watching creative people work, especially when they're not from my world. I brought a book with me and was reading in the audience before the lights went down. And this part really struck me. David Byrne wrote that his band Talking Heads, their albums sound like they sound because he was writing music that would sound good live at CBGB, the legendary New York club. And he made the case centuries of music were shaped by churches or dance clubs or punk bars or symphony halls. And it reminded me of how medium in our professional world shapes storytelling. Next, I read this cerebral biography of Jay Dilla, the hip-hop producer. And it got me thinking about music producing, which is interesting to compare to journalistic media. Kind of like an editor in some ways, but also it's pretty different. And it got me thinking also about how musicians collaborate, like people with solo careers who are also in a band, which is a pretty interesting way to work. This is one of my favorite things and how most of my imagining begins. It's looking outside of my professional world for inspiration and appreciating work that seems to be made with this kind of spirit. Are there creative tools we can use in ways they weren't meant for? Are there containers we've overlooked as vessels for journalism and storytelling? I really like this idea of containers, medium, genre, words like that. They make me think about formats that we know, like films and podcasts and books, which are all great. But containers, it's anything that can carry content. It feels more expansive somehow. Why can't a book have one 6-meter wide page between its covers? Or can it be a box instead, like Chris Ware's Building Stories, which has one voice but wildly different formats? A billboard can be a container. Hank Willis Thomas's For Freedoms project commissioned hundreds of billboards from artists, many of them topical. And then Frank Ocean released a version of his album Blonde where the liner notes were a massive magazine and the album was inside. I really love this kind of inversion, actually. The Pulitzer Prize-winning composer Ellen Reed made this app that totally blew my mind. It's called Soundwalk. She scored Central Park, essentially. She wrote this classical composition for all the different parts of Central Park and then created zones that were sort of fenced by GPS, and you install this app and you walk through the park and there are these looping soundscapes that shift. You can't even feel what's happening. It just sort of moves from one moment to another when you move from one part of the park to another. So you walk up a path, up a hill to a place where you see the skyline and the music swells underneath you. It's maybe the first time my phone made me feel more present. And that's something that I've thought about a lot. I'm really interested in media that makes us feel something or that connects us. I think a lot about what we remember and why we remember it. Magnum's Postcards from America is more than 10 years old, but I still think about it all the time. There's a group of major fine art photographers who usually work alone who went on a road trip together in a van, and they made print zines and books and posters, but they also blogged. It was digital and analog, it was playful and it was serious, it was fast and it was slow, it was journalism and it was an art project, it was all these different things at once. So I saw 2 3D films recently. I saw Kung Fu Panda 4 with a kid, and the Wim Wenders documentary Anselm, not with a kid. His first 3D documentary, saw it years ago, Pina, about the choreographer Pina Bausch, totally blew my mind when I saw it in the theater. I love that he's making art documentaries with these tools that are meant for a totally different kind of movie. I pay a lot of attention to stand-up comedy specials too, especially ones that are story-based more than joke-based. When you listen to them in that way, you can pick up so many different lessons about story structure and pacing and voice. And then a totally different project, if you haven't seen Gary Hustwitz's Eno, the biography of the documentary of the legendary music producer, he has 500 or so hours of footage which he's edited and cut up, and then the film is assembled live by AI during the screening, and it's never the same film twice. He worked with Teenage Engineering to design the tech, and then they actually put the hardware on stage at the screening, so it's kind of like a live performer. The shocking thing about it is it actually works. It's a good film. It's a documentary. I think he's called it a generative documentary. I don't know how to totally describe it, but that's one of the things I like about it. And just one more. I was reading this book with a 7-year-old, and it got me thinking about a serious reported nonfiction idea, even though it's about a cat and a robot fish that teach comic book making to young frogs. Because the thing is that inspiration doesn't have to be a model. Maybe the takeaway is one tiny thing, but it invites you to consider new possibilities. So what do we do with all this? A little over a year ago, I formed a new thing, a creative incubator and production company called Beyond Beyond. I'm generating ideas for editorial experiences, particularly interested in novel formats, that's probably not a surprise, and then bringing them to media companies, cultural institutions, funding sources. Some companies and projects find me, can work both ways. Making a spatial audio project and developing a new live journalism experiment and other stuff I can't talk about just yet. But one project you'll hear more about in the coming months is called Duettist. It's a nonprofit pilot. We're funding and producing creative collaborations between pairs of people who do different things, like an audio journalist and a choreographer, or a poet and a software developer, or a nonfiction author and a musician, working across all different genres and formats, including some unusual ones. And we'll partner with media companies or other cultural institutions to bring things into the world. Right around 15 years ago, on a beach, I wrote Live magazine in the back of the novel I was reading. A Live magazine. What was that? I had no idea what it was. I had no idea what it might be. I had no idea how to make it. But you have to start somewhere. Thank you.
You have to start somewhere. Sometimes ideas come to us humbly and not fully formed. Sometimes they hit us like a divine and beaming ray of light, which happened to me when I met Douglas 13 years ago in a panel just like this one. Except we weren't in an Italian 13th century church, but in an American 17th century university, Harvard. At the time, I was making documentaries, some of them very long, very narrative, 90 minutes long, some of them very short. I loved making films about ideas again, that I like to transform into stories. That landed me a Nieman Fellowship. And back in Paris, in the blink of an eye, I became an entrepreneur without even noticing it, and with my 3 girls, not even teenagers. Since I started Live magazine as a side project, a little hobby. And here we are, 13 years later. We've played in the most incredible venues in Europe. We've created 160 unique shows, each of them with a different lineup of journalists and a live band. We have gathered an audience of 170,000 people on 3 continents, and it's a very, very engaged audience. I've never seen someone look at his phone during one of our shows. And we also traveled the world. We're very proud to have presented stories in 11 languages: French, English, Turkish, Darija, Norwegian, Romanian, Dutch, Yoruba, Italian, and Spanish. We've been to Lagos for a Nigerian photographer special. We've been to Abidjan for a football Africa Cup of Nations special. We've almost made it to Algiers with a lineup of Algerian journalists, but in the end, we were banned entry to the country. The good thing with Live magazine is that in authoritarian regimes, we can disseminate journalism completely under the radar. The censorship thinks we're entertainers and show business people, and we also are, but we are also damn political. We love to go to country where freedom of the press is threatened. We went to Istanbul with a show with Turkish journalists. In Turk, we went to Beirut, a collaboration with our friends from L'Orient Le Jour. We even have our own tour bus now. We did a Moroccan tour across 3 cities, Marrakesh, Rabat, and Casablanca. And we are happy to announce that in less than a month, and you're the very first one to see this poster, I've just received it this morning in my mailbox, we'll be in Kyiv giving a show in Ukrainian with 10 Ukrainian and French journalists, the French being subtitled into Ukrainian, like at the opera. So please spread the word. Today, we have a sustainable model. We're a team of 12 people. Wink, wink, India Bukrel and Aryan Papillons, my partner in business, in creativity, and in pretty much everything. They are sitting back there with the technicians. We received 0 subsidiaries, very unusual in France, by the way, where both journalism and culture are heavily subsidized for content creation as well for distribution. We're too weird. Though I shall say we survived the pandemic thanks probably to public fundings, generous cash made available for people like us, but also thanks to our capacity to create fresh content all the time. Our biggest pride and joy is to gather in the same theater my 90-year-old conservative father who listens to the French folk news called CNews 24/7 and kids from the banlieue. To have in the same room, sitting in the dark, people who are definitely not on the same sides of our polarized world, people who usually have no venues or outlets to laugh and cry together. When Douglas, you encouraged me to start a Live magazine in Paris, you just gave me 3 words, just do it. And since I had never seen pop-up magazine with my own eyes, and since it was not recorded, so it truly felt like a blank canvas to me. I felt free to put my own obsession and ideas within the frame you invented. So by the way, let me say 2 words, thank you, for the record. And we also have been starting something new recently. This year, Live magazine produced its very first one-woman show. It's called This Is Not a Religion by journalist Elodie Amri, a 1 hour and 15-minute investigation crafted in the signature Live magazine style. A powerful story 10 years in the making, uncovering rape and sexual abuse within the Tibetan Buddhism. The tagline, how I was blocked on WhatsApp by the Dalai Lama. One day, someone told us that at Live magazine we were like a bunch of florists. And it's true, we've mastered the art du bouquet, floral arrangement. Among ourselves, we often talk about story gathering like, flower picking. We pick them carefully with love until every sentence, every emotion finds its perfect place. So, a story, a show is unique, it's ephemeral, it's fleeting, it's delicate, it's beautiful. And it feeds the imagination beast. Speaking about imagination, as some of you may know, our secret baseline at Live magazine is 100% ephemeral, 99% true. And I guess that this 1%, what's left, once everything is fact-checked, after everything has been recouped, That's very small, elusive part of the truth, which is maybe our imagination. And now, Sonia.
I don't have much voice, I'm sorry. And as you're going to understand, I'm a radio person. But I want to start with a sentence by Mark Twain that I love, and which is, truth is stranger than fiction. True stories, repeated stories, once you augment them with a dose of imagination, are really powerful. And this is quite paradoxical, but imagination is our superpower as journalists to fight fake news. Where do ideas come from? How did I end up as a reporter and editor looking for men who wanted to have their penis, wanted to have a penis reduction? Be careful, as Doug just said, look out, it could also happen to you. But wait a second. First of all, let me introduce to you my national public radio show, which is called Les Pieds sur terre, in English, something like feet on the ground. And in France, some people call it an institution, and they call me a grande dame de la radio, or a monument, which makes me feel like an old apparatchik, but that's life. Les Pieds sur terre, so is a 30 minutes daily radio show, and I've been producing it for 22 years with a good voice on France Culture, which is one of the 7 radio stations of Radio France, National Public Radio. Today, at noon, April 11, we broadcast episode 5,507, if you count reruns. The show is roughly made of reportage, memoir, stories, and first-person accounts, with no added commentary. It's important. Sometimes our show is just one story. Sometimes we piece together 2 or 3 stories on one theme. Sometimes it's current, it's related to current event, sometimes not. It's a bit like This American Life, if you know this show, except that it's only anonymous people speaking for themselves. You would never find a journalist speaking instead of them or speaking for them. Nothing happens in the studio. We are out and about and always in the field. And then we throw in a lot of editing. So the show is on air Monday through Friday at lunchtime. Every day, 220,000 people listeners listen to it, and digitally as a podcast, Les Pieds sur terre is downloaded by 3 to 4 million people a month. I'm proud, it's the 2nd most downloaded podcast from Radio France. Obviously, when podcast appeared, the audience considerably regenerated. Before, I always say mother would tell their children to listen to us, and now it's the student or the children who tell their parents, go and listen at this podcast. But I want to explain that I launched Les Pieds sur terre at a turning point on French national politics in 2002 for the first and unfortunately not the last time the far right reached the 2nd round in the presidential election. So many people were stunned to discover that millions were voting for ideas that seemed irrational and dangerous. So I wanted to try and understand. I wanted to give these people a voice. So in the beginning, the show was very radical. As you can hear in the first jingle, which included this sentence that means absolutely nothing, but everyone thought it was super great, and it says, "Nobody knows what's going on today because nobody wants anything to happen."
Personne ne sait ce qui se passe aujourd'hui parce que personne ne veut qu'il se passe quelque chose. Bougez pas! Attention! Attention!
Les Pieds sur terre, une émission proposée par Sonia Kronlund.
Ne vous affolez pas, c'est des manifestants, et la rue est envahie complètement.
Et pourquoi on le ferait pas plus souvent? On pourrait le faire tous les jours, on pourrait le faire 10 fois par jour, 20 fois par jour.
So what you hear in the background are protests, and the last sentence says, "The street is filled with protesters, and we could do it more often." Obviously, I failed in my enterprise to fight far-right thinking, but I'm still standing. Here I am, 22 years later, with the same ambition, listen to the so-called ordinary people and make sure they are listened at. Today, our jingle is not as radical as it used to be, and it's much shorter. Less is more. This is a new jungle.
Les Pieds sur terre, Sonia Kronlund.
So now it's 10 seconds, the jingle. And so one last data, each show, which is 30 minutes, costs approximately 4,000 euro of taxpayer money to make. It's not much. We are all underpaid, and we are funded only by government money. Our budget is voted in Parliament. So there is no advertising at all on this radio, except a tiny bit for podcast. This is a very fragile ecosystem, but also exceptional, quite unique in the world. But we are a daily show, and this really matters. Every day is a new day. Every single morning, I have to come up with new ideas, new topic, new formats, and with total freedom. I don't have to report to anyone at all, I swear it. And this is how one morning we ended up discussing, my team and I, about male deconstruction. And since we had already reported on penis enlargement, and given the context of the new masculinity, I had this idea, maybe there are men somewhere who, instead of enlarging their penis, have decided to have it shortened or reduced or shrunk. And we investigated for a week or so and found two men who explained why they've had surgery to reduce the size of their penis. And then we put the story on air with no further comment, and I called the episode "Size Matters." So truth is stranger than fiction. I come from a fiction background. I have studied literature and written film script before becoming a journalist. I don't have the mindset of someone who studied journalism, nor do most of my reporters who come from all over the place. But they have one thing all in common: imagination, creativity, fantasy, special talents required also to create fiction. I remember one reporter who wanted to do an episode on slowness. I was doubtful. Slowness equals boring. But she came up with an idea, and the idea was snails. In France, we raise and eat snails, as you well know. But before they end up in your mouth with parsley and garlic, they are very slow. So my reporter spent 2 months calling snail farms and looking for snail stories, until a mother told her that she had a little girl with autism. And the mother had created a tiny snail house for her, and the girl had found animals that resembled her, and thanks to them, to this snail, she could build a relationship with the world around her. She could at last reconnect with small, slow, living beings like her. The question I'm very often asked is, how do you come up with new ideas? I always say, I'm very sorry about the voice. That's not what I always say, but I always answer. There are ideas you look for, snails' stories, and ideas you actually find. Because an idea is always a matter, according to me, of allowing yourself to have ideas, to give yourself permission to be creative, to be wild. And then just do it, try it. Allow yourself to have good ideas or to have bad ideas. I think a creative idea is an opportunity. 3 months ago, I discovered that in the worst prison in Tehran, there was a French guy called Olivier, and he was jailed there for more than 2 years and a half, and he was an actual hostage. I discovered that Olivier has an access to a telephone, and we started a conversation twice a week. You don't know, but Iran is my second home, my pays de cœur, as we say. And every time I pick up the phone and he says, "Hello, this is Olivier in Tehran," I start crying. So we can hear just him saying that.
Allô? Allô?
Oui, bonjour, c'est Olivier Grondeau à Téhéran. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui, bonjour Olivier.
Le son est à peu près...
C'est déjà super de vous entendre.
So I'm crying, but he's laughing. And to translate, he just say, "Hello, it's great to hear you. Can you hear me? Yeah, good to," and it's very moving. And this is how we tuned an idea into a new format, an audio series based on solely a phone conversation with a guy imprisoned in Iran. So an idea at first can sound silly or a bit crazy or a little or completely obsessive, but that's the nature of imagination. The magic ingredient to say what we want, to share a little more of a little more humanity, and to connect with each other in the most intimate way possible, as I've tried now. And we need to strike hard. Thank you.
Merci, Sonia. And indeed, fake news are extraordinary stories, wow stories, unbelievable stories. And to counter the fake news, we actually need to double down on imagination, paradox. We also need to be entertaining. Fun fact, David, who is now a superstar, made his very first appearance on their live magazine stage. As I was saying earlier, be careful, it might happen to you as well. There was a time when David was the head of the video department at Le Monde, but he's going to tell you all about himself.
So Florence asked me to speak in this panel because for the last 15 years, I've been what you might call a non-usual journalist, a weird journalist, and I'm getting weirder and weirder by the day. And by weirder, I mean that my work keeps drifting away from traditional journalism. I started as a pretty regular reporter for French outlets. For a while, as Florence said, I ran the video department at Le Monde newspaper in France. But gradually, I started slipping in jokes and then songs into my work. And now, at least for a portion of what I do, I'm more of a comedian and musician, but with a bit of journalism still hanging on. I can give you 2 examples so that you can see what I mean. The first is taken from a video I did on Ticino, the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. Ticino is the poorest canton in Switzerland. It's still rich because it's Switzerland, but it's less rich than other parts of the country. In the video, I explain much of this and other things, and then I end the video with a song in Italian.
Dicono tutti che sono povero, dicono tutti che non ho soldi. È crudele, ma che cosa rispondi? Che non ho soldi, ma sono sexy. Non ho soldi, ma sono sexy. Non ho soldi, ma sono sexy.
Piccolo portafoglio certo, ma alta sensualità. Reddito ridicolo forse, ma super flessibilità. Sono ticinese. Sono ticinese.
Okay, yeah. So somehow that's journalism. I also have a live show. I started doing live performances with Live Magazine back 7 years ago, and now I have my own live show. I've been touring with this show for the last couple of years, and in it I have a bit about these supermarket trouts. And I ask myself a question, are they authentic? And I notice there is a picture of a guy on the top left corner of the package. So what I did is I set out to track this guy down to find if he actually exists. And
bonjour, je m'appelle Bernard Gassi et c'est moi que l'on voit en photo sur les barquettes de truite.
So I went from being a regular journalist to being whatever you call a person who does that. And Florence thought that just talking about how I went from one to the other would be a relevant contribution to this panel. I should start by saying that journalism for me was not a calling. I didn't dream of becoming a journalist, but at the age of 23, which is kind of late, I had to choose a career, and I thought, well, why not journalism? You learn new things every day. There is a measure of creativity in it. Let's try that. I did an internship at a radio station in Paris where I covered the news in a pretty straightforward, neutral way. But then I spent a year at the University of Berkeley School of Journalism in California. And that's where I discovered American journalism, which in my view is the best in the world. It's not a very original thing to say, but that's my point of view. And by best I mean something very quite specific. First, from my experience, American journalists are more thorough in their research, their reporting, and their fact-checking than most of the reporters I meet in France. No offense to anybody French in the assembly. And some of this excellence is just built in the system. For instance, there is nothing resembling the fact-checking department of the New Yorker magazine in France. There's nothing. I've checked. There's nothing compared to that. That compares to that. And secondly, good American journalists are obsessed with not being boring, obsessed with the fact that they have to be entertaining. And that was a big difference compared with what I had seen in France. Generally speaking, I have found that French professors, French teachers, and also to some extent French journalists tend to think that the attention of their audience is owed to them. American professors and journalists seem to understand that attention is something you have to earn. And for that, they use creativity and imagination. Journalism in America feels more, I think, at least to me, like an art form, just an art form that must abide by an overarching rule, which is telling the truth. And this art, I discovered, could take many faces. It could take the face of literary journalism, meaning books that read like novels, except everything is true. Joan Didion, For instance, we're going to see, I think, oh, no, il y a le machin. Joe and Didion. Oh yes, Joe and Didion, John McPhee, Gay Talese. These are all great novelists, but they take very little license with the facts. It could lie also, very simply, in the choice of subjects. In The Believer, in The New Yorker, in The Atlantic, I started collecting articles about topics I had no idea I could even care about, much less so write about, like 10,000-word pieces on oranges, for instance, even books about oranges. I had never read anything like that in any news outlet in France. It could also take the form of comedy. In the US, I discovered fact-based comedy. Turns out you can say things that are 100% accurate, well-researched, and still make people laugh. Lastly, in America, I discovered that the art of journalism could take the form of pure design. It is in America that I stumbled upon great database journalism, such as this piece for the New York Times about the homicides in New York City. And also great user experience design in pieces such as the now very famous Snowfall. I don't know if you've heard of Snowfall, probably, because it's very, very famous. It's a report about an avalanche that killed 5 skiers in 2012, and that mixed infographics, text, video, and audio in a very streamlined way. So when I came back to France in 2009, I felt much freer to start experimenting with new formats. I started doing what were once called web documentaries, they were very hype in the late 2000s. They were forgotten as fast as they came. And I did these web documentaries, in which I designed the interface. I did all the reporting and the editing. I did one called Egg Stories, where I followed 2 eggs from the coop to the place where they were bought by consumers. I did another one about deforestation in the Kilimanjaro region. I also did some database journalism for Le Monde, and especially this interactive map of unemployment in France. A little side note, none of these pieces are visible online anymore because they were all coded in Flash, and browsers don't support Flash anymore. And it's strange to see that you can still read manuscripts from the 12th century, but not content that was produced just like 15 years ago. Anyway, after a year of doing that, I understood that I couldn't make a living with it. For the whole egg story, for instance, which took me 6 weeks of solid work to produce, Le Monde paid me 400 euros, which is basically nothing. And on top of that, it was not successful. Nobody gave a damn about what I was doing, except maybe some journalism nerds, but that was not my target audience. So I started thinking about ways to be more engaging to audiences while retaining my taste for both design and hard facts. And I said, well, why not weave all of that in regular stories with a narrative arc? So in 2011, I teamed up with an artist and animator who was also a friend of mine from high school. His name is Leonard Cohen, exactly like the singer. Which is the reason why, for a long time, we called him Leonard the Ungoogleable. Because, of course, when you Googled him, he was always buried under his much more famous homonym. We spent 7 months creating a 4-minute video that explained the economic theory behind public funding for the arts, which is a kind of a difficult topic. 7 months. For 4 minutes of video. It was called The Parable of the Tuileries. And that video led to 3 years of doing 95 episodes of a little animated series for a channel in France called Canal+, private channel. It was called the Chiffroscope. These were 2-minute videos about large topics with some humor in it, with some jokes, but all based on hard data.
Is the world more violent than it used to be? It's 8 p.m. Julie's watching television with her boyfriend George. The anchor's talking about the war in Afghanistan and the deaths of Darfur. And when he mentions the murder of 8-year-old Keith in Iowa, Julie says to George, "Oh my God, I can't believe how violent the world's become." At this point, a man rings the doorbell. It's Steven Pinker. Steven is a psychology professor at Harvard, and he has wonderful hair. He wrote a very big book precisely about the decline of violence in history. The world, he says, has never been a calmer place than it is now. The murder rate in Western Europe, for instance, has been going down for 800 years.
And then there was a big shift. First, I did a pilot with my own money for Canal+. It's kind of a risk I took, called Depuis quand. Depuis quand in French means since when, and the idea was to tell the story of how things started, how objects in particular were invented, and to travel wherever the inventors of these things were. I put every ounce of creativity I had in me for this pilot, and also most of my money, and it got accepted by Canal+. And I said to them that I wanted to do everything myself. So Canal+ gave me a fixed budget, not a huge one, around 6,000 euros per episode, and I could use that money as I pleased. I was in charge of all the decisions, and when you have that, there is nothing that hinders your imagination. I'll give you an example. One of the episodes I did was Depuis quand ça existe le surimi? Since when does crabstick exist? For that episode, I decided I had to attend the actual Crabstick Congress, which happened to be in Madrid. So I went, and then I flew to Japan to meet the grandson of the inventor of crabsticks. And since then, I'd say the proportion of jokes in my work has kept going up and up, which means that now I'm maybe more of a comedian than a journalist, but I keep, I think, a journalistic approach to my comedy. In my live show, for instance, when I say, "Well, have you ever noticed," which is basically the biggest cliche in stand-up comedy, I don't stop there. I back it up with actual documents, proof, source material for the joke. We could say it's actually, it's fact-checked comedy. Thank you very much.
So thank you for listening to our stories. And now we have the time for... We have one question, maybe. So somebody has a question to ask?
Bonsoir David, bonsoir mesdames, bonsoir monsieur. Gilles Bruno, Observatoire des médias.
So maybe in English?
Yeah, sorry, excuse me. Or in Italiano? In English. So I just wanted to know if, David, would you give your format to journalism community, and how should we call that?
Would I give it, like for free?
Yes, for free.
No.
Come on.
And there was a second part of the question. Maybe I didn't get it. No. Okay. Yeah.
So we're going.
No, but if you want to pay for it, I'll be glad to give it to you.
Someone has another question in English? Well. Thank you.